Hello, everybody. This is Joseph P. Farrell with a special news and views from the Nefarium on Saturday, July 16th, 2016. I'm making this my blog of the day. This is going to be about the attempted coup in Turkey against Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan. And you'll remember that I did my news and views Thursday on his sudden about face. So there is certainly something going on in the Middle East, in the world at large, and in Turkey. And I want to talk about that today and offer some speculations. The reason why this is appearing so late, normally my daily blogs appear in the morning, but I literally was up all night trying to gather some information about the story to do a blog, and then I thought, well, I better just do this as a news and views because it will be simpler that way, and I'll be able to get it out more quickly. At the very last minute last night, or rather this morning, I was also invited on Richard Hoagland's show to do a panel discussion with some other people about what was going on in Turkey. So some aspects of this are going to be my attempt to summarize some of the ideas that we were talking about on his show. Now, let me put this, my remarks, my high-octane speculation here about what may be going on into the context that I think it needs to be put in. The timing of this is crucial. Recall the Brexit vote came just a few days before President Erdogan made this sudden shift of Turkish policy across the board. This is very important to understand. He's not just suddenly reversing course with Russia, whereas last year he was very triumphalistic, very belligerent about shooting down the Russian fighter, and he's now offering apologies and compensation, which the Russians demanded, which back, a few months ago he said he wouldn't do. But he's also made now overtures to Syria and to Assad's government and to Israel. All right. Now, this is coming in the wake of the Brexit vote. I do think that that's significant because I think that Erdogan, as long as, if you view it simply from his perspective, as long as Turkey was playing Washington's game in the Middle East, it would not be welcomed, so to speak, as a partner in the emerging Chinese-Russian Silk Road efforts in Asia, Central Asia, and the Middle East. In other words, I think Britain kind of kicked this loose. We're looking at possibly one of the effects of the Brexit vote, and now Turkey made these initiatives. In this reading, please understand, this is just one reading, made these initiatives in an effort to reverse course, patch up its relationships with Russia, with Israel, and so on, in an effort to stabilize the region now, so that it might have a seat at what's going on with the long-term plans of China and Russia in Asia. Now, that's one way of viewing it. But let's also recall something else that's happened just this last week, and I'm going through this very loose scaffolding of a timeline because I think it's very important. We had, of course, the attacks in Nice, France. And if you follow the reports of what's now coming out, apparently the perpetrator had a quote-unquote sudden conversion to jihadism. In other words, the French security services did not have this guy on their radar until the very last minute. Now, this is very important for everybody to understand, because the tactics of the jihadists is to target moderate Muslims and threaten them or their family unless they do as they're told. So in other words, this guy may not have been, let's be very honest here, this guy may not have been a jihadist. He may have been under some sort of pressure. But that too comes at a convenient time, because as you know, the Brexit vote has kicked loose and fueled the anti-immigration parties in Europe that want to close the borders and defend their national cultures. And I'm sorry, folks, these are not far right-wing parties. For the most part, there are some, but these are not far right-wing parties. They're simply trying to defend their culture and their national sovereignty against an EU bureaucracy that does not and will not listen to them. Now, what this Nice attack does is, you'll recall, after the Paris attacks, President Hollande in France put France under an emergency, a state of emergency, which, because of the Nice attacks, have now been extended a further 3 months. So what this does is it allows him potentially, as far as I know, allows him potentially to ward off or head off any internal dissension, and he wants to stay in the EU. Now, this is very important because Hollande is trailing in the polls against the leader of the French Front National, Marine Le Pen, who has moved her party away from the radical ideas of her father, the far-right ideas, and tried to position it more toward the center as a kind of center-right party. But she is leading Hollande in the polls rather considerably. So what the Nice attack does is it also allows Hollande, which he has already done, to extend that state of emergency in France. This looks to me, I'll be very honest, this looks to me like it is an attempt. Sorry about the phone ringing here, folks. This looks to me like an attempt to create any condition necessary so that they can create a state of emergency and keep the EU together. That this may be a desperation move. That's one way of reading the Nice attacks. We'll have to wait for further evidence. Then, as all of this is happening, as Erdogan and all of these stories are breaking about his sudden about face, we had that very mysterious trip of Secretary of State Ketchup Kerry, as I like to call him, to Russia to negotiate with Mr. Putin, and then a day later with the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov about coordination of American and Russian efforts in the Middle East against terrorism. Now that again is a complete about face. And that suggests that Erdogan's about face may have been planned as a part of this overture, this diplomatic overture to Russia, to diffuse the tensions that were emerging. Now, that I think is very important, because this again puts the coup attempt and any analysis of the coup attempt into a light of interpretation that we're going to get to in a moment. Now, finally, during the coup itself, and this is one of the things I found very, very peculiar. During the coup itself, I was watching the articles. People were sending me articles. I was online trying as best as I could after I got done with yesterday's vid chat to kind of put together a timeline. And it was very interesting. I discovered something very weird. As the coup was taking place, Chancellor Angela Merkel came out with a kind of soft-spoken, carefully worded message of support for Erdogan's government against the coup people, all right? Then Erdogan flew from where he was in a Turkish resort city to Ataturk Airport in Istanbul, you'll recall. He got on his aircraft and asked for asylum, asked for sanctuary in Germany, and Germany refused. Okay, that I think is careful, carefully has to be carefully considered. All right, Germany refused after extending previously a kind of waffling support for Erdogan's government. All right, now that's very interesting. Now, as he's flying, this is very significant. As Erdogan is flying, he was intercepted by Turkish F-16 jets that were apparently jets that were under the control of the coup plotters, and he was not shot down. In fact, he returned to Istanbul, where he gave that press conference which undid the coup, asking Turks to hit the streets in support of the government and against the coup plotters. So this is the background, the timing of events, that I think makes this coup so very interesting. And I think there are basically 4 possibilities of interpretation here as of this moment, reviewing the stories that have come in thus far about what may have happened. Now, the first possibility is an internal coup In other words, there are no outside actors external to Turkey involved. All right. Now, this is, incidentally, the meme that is now being put out by the Erdogan government, in that they are claiming that Erdogan's one-time ally and now enemy, Fethullah Gulen, an Islamic cleric that wants to see Turkey embrace even more of its Islamic culture into the Turkish Republic, which Erdogan has been pursuing, as we all know. He's moving Turkey away from that secular state inheritance of Kemal Ataturk and back into a kind of secular Islamicization. But Fethullah Gulen wants even more of this. So Gulen has maintained a network inside of Turkey, a network of supporters inside the Turkish government and military and so on. And this is what Erdogan is now claiming the coup was. This was an attempt by Gulen to overthrow his government. Now, that may or may not be the case. As we're going to see, there are indications here that Erdogan is taking this as a crisis of opportunity and now blaming his old enemy so that he can clean up and kill two birds with one stone. All right, so we have to be careful here. But now here's the curious thing: Fethullah Gulen is in asylum in this country. In other words, this country is protecting him and protecting Erdogan. All right, so I find this very peculiar. There's something else behind this whole scenario. Now, in addition to this, the second possibility is that this is a staged internal coup, but not from Gulen's network, but Erdogan himself. All right, because if you look at this coup, as far as what I've been able to determine, looking at the articles, the few videos that I've been able to review, this coup looks either like it was a terribly rushed, slapped together at the last minute operation, or that it was an operation that had been prepared, but the timetable had been moved up drastically because of the sequence of events that I outlined previously. And because of this, it was a rushed and botched effort. Because there are certain things that I noticed that were very peculiar. The coup plotters didn't seem to me to make any attempt to ensure that police units were entirely on their side, or to get loyal police units in key places, in key cities, loyal to them in key positions in those cities. There's a lot here that doesn't look like a coup. And one of the biggest things that I noticed was that some of the army units, not necessarily the air units that we saw on the videos shooting and strafing and bombing, but some of the army units looked to me like they were only kind of half-hearted or half-interested in this. They didn't seem to be terribly interested in pursuing a coup. And there were a lot of people out there, I noticed, that were noticing the same thing. So we have the idea that Erdogan staged the coup himself to strengthen his hand and do what he's now doing, and instituting a further purge of the Turkish government, and particularly concentrating on Gulen's network and the Turkish military. So this is very peculiar, because if that's so, if that reading of events is so, it makes me question whether even that's feasible, because the people I've talked to, and one of the panelist members on Richard Hoagland's show last night, off the air, informed everybody that, well, in Turkey, the Turkish population is about 50-50 divided. About half the population wants to continue on the secularization road that Turkey had been pursuing under the kind of Ataturk inheritance and heritage, and the other half of the population wants to move towards more Islamicization, as it has been doing under President Erdogan. So Erdogan's appeal here is very interesting. When he appeals to the Turkish population to support the government, that was a kind of a risky thing for him to do, all right? Although he did have strong support in Istanbul, where he used to be mayor. So let's take note of that. Now, there are two other speculative possibilities here as to what's going on in this coup. That it was an externally driven coup. In other words, that the real impetus, the real pressure to launch this coup via whatever network is there in Turkey, and we're going to get back to other possibilities here in a moment, may have been an American or Western-sponsored coup, unhappy about Erdogan's about-face and sudden reversal of policy vis-a-vis Russia, Syria, and Israel. Now, that coup, if you're reading the events that way, that opens up all sorts of possibilities as who might have been behind it, including countries like Saudi Arabia and so on. But again, I don't think the Saudis have anything to gain by doing anything like this. And as far as the United States is concerned, or any other Western player, we saw that the United States itself appears to be willing to reverse its position in the efforts of Secretary of State John Kerry in Russia, talking to the Russian president and Russian foreign minister. But if it is coming from some Western country or some element in the United States, then it may be some element in the United States opposed to the course or direction that it now appears that the Obama administration is wanting to go. Now, I found it very peculiar when Secretary of State Kerry went to Russia. There was a strange press conference in this country given at the Department of State by one of its spokeswomen, and she kind of conveyed the impression to me that there was some sort of disconnect between the White House and the State Department. And some people speculated that, well, Kerry just did this on his own initiative. Well, I would think that that would be next to impossible, but there appeared to be some sort of disconnect that may, as Hoagland pointed out last night, that may have been an effort to create plausible deniability should Secretary of State Kerry's efforts fail in Russia. But again, if it's external and coming from some Western country, then it has to be a group or rogue network that is not happy with the current initiatives that the Obama administration is trying to undertake. Now, that leaves us with a fourth and final possibility, that it was an externally launched or pressured coup from some element that was unhappy with Erdogan's sudden reversal of policy, and that may be unhappy additionally with the American reversal of policy. And I'm going to propose that it may be our old friends, the fascist mafia, the Nazi International, which, as we know, does have its connections to radical Islamic terrorism historically, going all the way back to World War I and the alliance between Imperial Germany and the Ottoman Empire. All right. Now, there is another group in Turkey that we might look at and consider in this regard, and it's a group called the Grey Wolves. Remember the assassination of Pope John Paul II, the attempted on his life by Mehmet Ali Agca, a Turk, who later it was discovered was indeed a member of the Grey Wolves. The Grey Wolves, if you dig into the history, is a kind of radical Turkish neo-fascist group that believes in the racial supremacy of the Turkish people and so on and so forth, that does have a kind of radicalizing Islamic tendency, but most importantly, it was a group with very strong connections during World War II to the Nazi Waffen-SS. So again, we have this very strange connection. This Grey Wolves society is still in existence in Turkey, and it may have played, possibly, I don't know, but it may have played some role in this, which, if that's the case, it would indicate, again, there may be a large international network behind this that wants to keep the Middle East destabilized and to suck Russia and the United States into an increasing confrontational and eventually conflict. That has been the strategy of this post-war fascist international all along. since World War II. So those are the possibilities that we're looking at as far as I can tell. I'm not saying that this is an exhaustive list by any means. I think there are other possibilities as well. I think the way that we're going to be able to tell how this will shake out is by watching the commentary and what other governments do, in particular Israel, the Saudis, the Russians, France, Germany, and Great Britain, China's reaction, and so on. What happens now and what Erdogan's government does now is also going to be a key part of the story as to who was really behind this and what their motivations really were. So that's it for this special news and views from the Nefarium. This is Joseph P. Farrell. I'll see you on the flip side, and God bless.